Hi everybody, how is everybody doing? Nice to see you all. Very happy to see so many familiar faces and some new faces joining us today for this webinar. So I would like to say welcome to our OST community meetings. I'm Paula Adams from the Hawaii After School Alliance. And I would like to welcome everybody, as I said before, and then I'm going to pass the torch to Madison. Madison is our new Vista member. She's joining us for a year, and she's going to share with you some announcements. Welcome, everybody.
Hi everyone. Yeah, like Paula said, I am Madison Bisson. I just joined on August 2nd, so a little bit new, but I'm excited to meet and talk with you all. We're going to get right into it. If someone could go to the next slide for me. Awesome. If you have not yet completed our out of school time survey, we'd really love to get your after school program on our map. This is a super valuable resource for parents and educators to have access to all of the after school programs and options in their community. The link to view the map and get your program added to our database is in the chat. Right. Next Friday, August 27th at 10 a.m., we have a Mental Health America of Hawaii leading us in a workshop on youth mental health. You'll get an overview of the state of youth mental health in Hawaii and resources and solutions available locally and nationally. Hope you can join us next week, and the registration for that is also in the chat now. The Hawaii After School Alliance is excited to present the Ahalokahi Hawaii Community Conference. It's a virtual conference in conjunction with the Open Minds, Open Spaces Conference on October 20th to the 22nd. This is a virtual conference to bring Hawaii's educators and after school and youth development professionals to work together to expand opportunities for youth to learn, thrive, and succeed. The registration is now open and the link is in the chat. And finally, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Marjorie Martin is an associate professor in the School of Education at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. She is also the executive director of UH Hilo Center for Place-Based Social and Emotional Development. With over 25 years of experience working in education, she began her career as a middle and high school teacher before pursuing her PhD at New York University in teaching and learning, where she focused on development of immigrant origin youth. During this time, she also served as a director of research, evaluation, and policy at the Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and the Transformation of Schools, as well as the research director for immigration studies at NYU. After completing her PhD in 2012, she taught at Brown University in the Human Development Program, and then came to UH Hilo and in 2016, where she teaches adolescent development, social and emotional learning, and learning environment courses in the Master of Teaching program. So we welcome her today.
Great, thank you so much, Madison. Aloha, everyone. This picture makes me laugh because I was like, that's before COVID look, and now is in COVID look. Masking all the gray hairs that we've all gotten from this past time. So before we get started, I wanted to get a sense of how we are all working with youth. So I have a quick poll that I hopefully will relaunch properly. And if you could just take a moment to complete this. So I'm asking you, how are you serving your students right now? Is it in person only, virtually only, kind of a mix of both? Or do you don't work directly with students, you're more behind the scenes? Looks like everyone who's going to complete it has completed it. So let's see who we have in the room with us. Can everyone see that? So we can see that we kind of have that very few of us are now doing only virtual work with students. And then we have in-person only, mixed, and then we have some of us who are working more behind the scenes as well. And I imagine if I did this talk next week, then things could possibly change because we're just living in this of an influx sort of time, which is why I titled today's talk, and I'll share. We'll see if it works. Oops, not that, not my notes. There we go. Does everyone see the screen? About really trying to think about uplifting our social emotional well-being during these times. And I was talking with Jen, Madison, and Paola before, and I don't know about all of you, but I feel like as of late, there's just been such a flurry of interest around social emotional well-being, which makes a lot of sense. But on the other hand, it means that instead of a year and a half ago, when we knew this was going to be an issue and we're reaching out trying to get information as we could, now we're being flooded. I know my own email box is full every single day of resources and all of these things going on. It's really hard to kind of make sense of it. So I'm putting together my my time with you today. What I thought I would do is it might be more useful for us to think about how we're designing our support systems for our children and youth. And I also drew in, thank you for those of you who put in some questions, and hopefully I'll be addressing those as well. So let me go in here. So I thought I'd just spend a very short amount of time kind of talking about where we are now, and then we'll focus in on designing a support system. So ultimately, when we think about social emotional well-being and how we're uplifting that for our children and youth, it's really very much by design. It's not just the individual strategies that we put in place with children and youth. It's literally how we're structuring our program, how we're attending to all of those different people and systems that surround our children and youth, and how we're taking care of ourselves. Because SEL isn't just one thing that you do, it actually lives in every part and every action that we do. So a lot of it is about creating that environment and thinking about those things. Then we'll shift to just, we'll spend some time in that, and you'll be working in groups to kind of talk and think through some of that. And then we'll jump into just a few high impact practices. So there's things that we want to get going just right now. What can I do right now to relieve the anxiety that my students are feeling, right? That we're working with. So I offer a few of those, but we also leave time for you to share with each other, because we are finding, all of us in our work, what is working well, what are the creative ideas out there. So I think that this is a time that instead of having me just talk at you about this is all the things you should do and need, but instead have you kind of work a bit together and share each other. And then, like I said, ultimately start to think about a larger structure of how we're supporting social emotional well-being for our students. So when you look for resources, or you go to the talk next week with the mental health providers, right, that you have a lens that you can see how it fits into your own system, so that we all don't feel like we're flailing so much all the time trying to grab things. And then along the way, we can do sharing and Q&A, and I'm hoping that we'll have some time at the end for very specific questions. So you can kind of put those into the chat along the way. So where we are. So we know that COVID has impacted our children and youth in many ways. So when we think about our schools, when we think about our programs, generally we are really attending to three needs for children and youth. One is clearly their academic needs, right? And we can be supporting it in a number of ways. The literal monitoring and safety needs, making sure that they're away from their families, and us in our different roles are playing that role of keeping our children and youth safe, both mentally and physically. And then also supporting and uplifting their social emotional needs, right? Right now, some of the areas that are really being impacted by COVID are children and youth sense of control. I think we're all kind of feeling it, not just all of us, right? that, any day you could have another new rule and something's going to come in. It might get better, it might wait. Are we going to be like this forever? So there's that lack of control that we're all feeling in every aspect of our lives, right? A sense of confidence, the feelings that we're making those right decisions, right? We know that confidence precedes competence. So for children and youth to be successful in whatever it is that they're doing, they need to have that confidence, and confidence wavers when you've been isolated for a year and a half, when you don't have a sense of certainty. Safety, both physical and emotional. We understand the physical COVID piece quite intimately as we're setting up our spaces and figuring out what we could do safely and what we can't do safely, right? But also emotionally. We know that there's been a huge uptick over the past year of cyberbullying, right? Of anxiety. And that all, it really impacts, and as children are now transitioning back into school, that sense of safety is being really threatened. That sense of belonging, right? This is especially acute for our children that are entering adolescence or in adolescence. A lot can change in a year. I remember after the first day asking a 16-year-old, saying like, how was school? And he's like, everyone's so tall now, like trying to refigure, like there were certain kids that were in his bubble last year and those who weren't, like some of his best friends, but are they still his best friends now? Like all that belonging, and where do I belong in my school space, right? I know another child who's just entering, or many children entering middle school who are kind of doing a double transition because they didn't have it last year, the year before, right? So that sense of belonging and how we belong. And then ultimately, along with that sense of connection, that Pilina. In thinking about specific kind of more childhood versus adolescence, some of the things that we really need to think about in our spaces, in our social emotional spaces, is for childhood is thinking about that development of self-concept. This is an area of very high impact that if we can really help with that process and to uplift that process, we will be doing a lot for our children. So these are things like empathy, social awareness, the ability to identify and articulate their feelings with others, the benefits from routines and predictability. So how predictable are we setting up our after-school programs for our children, right? Is there kind of a set routine going on? Yeah. And then opportunities for structured play. With the emphasis, we have these competing emphases going on right now in education. And one is the learning loss concern, and the other is the socio-emotional loss, right? But sometimes if the learning loss concern is so big, it can overtake, right? So that children end up having very little time to play and to have time that isn't completely controlled by that concern for academic space. Also that safety space, we need to be so concerned about that safety that we don't think, well, how do we set up unstructured, structured playtime for them? And we know that is enormously important for their raising of empathy, social awareness, et cetera, that learning from their peers, practicing those skills and gaining those really important connections. In terms of adolescence, we need to really think a lot about identity, that identity development piece. It's natural, and we at this time, to really try to figure out who we are in the world, where we belong, who are our people, who, where do we kind of fit in? Yeah. And we all understand that this is a time where peers are immensely important, and other adults who are not parents, right? We probably can think of all the times as parents that we give a piece of advice, child doesn't listen, and then they listen to somebody else who gives the exact same piece of advice, right? It can be really frustrating, but this is natural in this time. So they need access to peer groups and social connections. And without that being set up for them, they have been doing it, yeah? If we look at the rise of social media and the creating of that. But the interesting thing is that's actually led for teenagers to feel more isolated than they've ever felt before, right? because they're left a lot to their own druthers, what we call the social mirror of trying to figure out who they are with each other. They need opportunities to feel competent. So that confidence, competence piece, once again. They need to feel useful and needed. And they need to have opportunities to dream and envision their future selves. Yeah, this is a time where things are uncertain and what the future is going to look like. And it's not just COVID, it's climate change, right? It's all these changing dynamics that are happening that are all kind of impacting who they see themselves. And for students and for adolescents to really be able to navigate this difficult time, if they have a sense and they can see themselves as adults, it's a lot easier to navigate that pathway, even if it changes. Right. So they need those opportunities as we really tend to close in like COVID, right? And this is what you need to do right now. And if you don't get it, you're not going to get into college and you're not going to be successful. You're not going to be able to get a job. You're not going to be able to, like, all this, there's a lot of negative out there, and that all inhibits our abilities to kind of get that sense of our future selves and our sense in the world. So one thing that has really come out from this past year, and I slightly mentioned it, is that anxiety is really going through the roof, especially for our adolescents. In some ways, we have been really concerned about young children, but there's a lot of evidence that's showing that adolescents have been suffering the most throughout the pandemic. So I want to spend a little bit of time with them. We know that the adolescents, there have been signs of depression, but for every child who's showed a sign of depression, there's been 10 times who've shown those symptoms of anxiety. So how do we know anxiety when we see it? If we put choices out there and we see that they have difficulty making decisions, right? Kind of flitting and not being able to really commit to one thing or the other, or I don't know, or whatever, that could be a sign to watch out for. Being highly reactive, being super overreactive to a very simple kind of situation, right? That volatility. If you think about it, when you're really anxious, right, and then someone taps you on the shoulder, it's like, blah, right? That kind of response. Concerns about all the things that they're missing, FOMO, can be a sign of anxiety, especially if they say it a lot. There's definitely things that we're all missing, and we're all missing, and that's understandable. But if that seems to be really obsessive and really starting to take over, a sign we often know about, that difficulty in concentration. And then ultimately through Hilo, really keeping an eye on posturing. Are there tight postures? Are fists tight? Are faces tight? Are these tight, right? A lot of it's very inside. Do they have closed posture? So those bodily symptoms of protection that we take on during anxiety, when we have anxiety, are really key for us as adults to look out for. And I'll be talking more about that when we get into our high impact practices. So with all of this in mind, in thinking about uplifting our social emotional supports for our children and youth, it's not just about honing. We need to think about how we're creating these contexts around children and youth. Is our environment a space that is going to be really supportive, that is going to be uplifting, that's going to be a place of calm, that's going to be predictable, that's going to be fun, where maybe where kids can be kids a bit, right? And to do that, I suggest that we start thinking about how are all the different things that we're putting together in uplifting our students are looked at systematically. And I suggest this kind of 5-piece process, generally speaking, of thinking about how we're putting all this together. So first of all, we can think about how we're setting purpose. What is it as an organization? What is our purpose for our students in their socio-emotional well-being this year, right? Because instead of focusing on everything on the planet, maybe thinking about, we really want to focus on confidence, right? We really want to reduce anxiety. We really want to increase connection, right? Setting that purpose. Oh, hey, it refers to this as like the we why. We think about your purpose, where you've been, and why you're doing it. And then assembling those gifts. That's that strength-based approach that we have all we need around us. We don't always have to search out in the world to find the things. We have it. We have it in ourselves. We have it in our communities. Our students have it, and thinking about what those gifts are. And then designing that system of support, that community around that. Thinking about when they come in to our program, this is what we have in place. So designing that community, those conditions. And then those very specific kind of strategies and supports. And then assessing that. And you notice that it's a circle, but in many ways, we actually start with the assess piece. So what I thought we would start off with is actually having us in small groups, kind of assess where we are and thinking about setting up these systems of support for our students that we work with. And Jen, if you'll go ahead and throw the link into the chat. Oops, let me go here. So I have a few questions for us to think about that we don't always think about, and just regardless of if you're working directly with students and all the way out, but we need to think a bit about the social well-being of everyone who is surrounding our children and youth. And specifically, right, our adults. So the first question is asked, what are the processes in place to support social emotional well-being of the adults in our organization? When we are healthy, when we are calm, when we are feeling good about ourselves and our purpose, then we automatically are already uplifting the social-emotional well-being of our children and youth because we're in that good space, right? We know when there's a really anxious person around us, we get that vibe, and we're not going to be so calm either. Do we have our act together? That's a safety piece, right? How do we coordinate with the other organizations involved in our students' lives? If we're school-based, after school-based program, what's our relationship with our schools, other organizations? How do we collaborate with each other? Right? And those are the next two questions. Then thinking now to those who you're actually serving, what are some of the supports you have in place at your organization? And how are you supporting your families? So you start to see that we're creating this ecological system, this environment around our children and youth, and that's 80% of uplifting that socio-emotional well-being. How we're communicating with each other, how we're collaborating with each other, how we've set up that space for socio-emotional well-being. So we are going to throw you into randomized groups to kind of work through each of these questions. And it's okay if you don't have to answer every question, but the idea is that you might look at one of these and see a puka, but somebody else in your group might have some ideas around that. Or maybe none of us have thought of it before. But starting to kind of assess and put into place these guiding questions to start to think about for these. So the link is also in the chat, and I recommend you open that up now. And then Jen, you'll throw us into rooms for about 10 minutes, yeah? Any questions before we toss you in? Okay, we'll see you in 10. I imagine it probably wasn't enough time. These breakout rooms always work that way, that shock to the system. But let's just take a moment in the chat and just put in maybe one thing that you learned from the people you were talking with, like one thing you'd like to take away, one idea that you heard that others were doing, or things to think about. Just throw it right into the chat. Yeah, too fast. I know. I know. Yeah. And the importance of family engagement. Yes, absolutely. Self-care. Yeah. In-person learning. Yeah, we just made the decision in my program that we're not going to do in person at first, and I'm really sad about it. Yeah, a lot of self-care. Weekly well-being check-ins, great idea. Yeah. So a lot of things that we're thinking about doing for all of the students that we work with, we need to do for ourselves. We need to have in place for our families, right? PCNC plays an important role. Yeah, all these different things. So Jen, if you'll go ahead and throw the, do you want to throw the link to the folder, or do you want to just send it to them later? So this list of questions is something that I suggest that you do within your own organization as a way of kind of taking stock and thinking about, do we have the conditions set in place for that social emotional system of support? And like I said, that's 75 to 80% of it, because that's how we live. And one of the best ways that we can uplift is through that integration of living to uplift the social well-being of all of us. And the better ways that we can communicate and collaborate with the schools that we work with other organizations that might touch our families, the better it's going to be for our children and youth, because that creates that safety net around them where there's that consistency across the board. And we know very well that all of us are feeling, or maybe not all of us, but I know I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed. I know that our university is feeling overwhelmed. I know that our schools are feeling overwhelmed. There's a bunch of initiatives coming down that all target social emotional well-being, but they might not automatically seem connected if they come across as just these individual types of things, like just MTSS, the multiple systems of supports, and then PBIS, and then RTI, and then all of these things that are kind of pinpoint. They can seem separate if they're coming from all these different spaces. So creating that system becomes really important. A second really important piece then that I want to just kind of highlight a little bit, is the importance of coming from a strength-based space. We've heard this all before. I think we understand this, but really to think about, what are all of those gifts that we're bringing, instead of, because we're in such dark times where we very easily see all the negative and the challenges that are in front of us. So I suggest that you go through an exercise of something like this also with your organization, starting with our own personal gifts, right? What are the gifts that we as individuals are bringing to our organizations and to our children and youth? And I know that sometimes this can be really difficult to actually think about what we ourselves are bringing to the table, right? But it's really important as part of our work to have that awareness and to utilize what it is that we're bringing, right? I presented this with a group of teachers, and I remember one teacher was kind of saying, well, I have a real gift for gab, right? Just like, I talk a lot, da da da. It's like, but that is a gift. And then you think about our I've already spoken to teachers. I've tried that thing in the classroom that you told me about, and no one will talk, right? And it's like, well, you've got the gift for gab, right? Yeah, and this comes from Auntie Puanani Burgess. So yeah, thank you so much. That's exactly where this is from, right? And then thinking about that kind of ecologically to help to sort of build that system, thinking about what are the gifts of each of our organizations. What is it that we're bringing to the table? What about our students? What about our families, our neighborhoods, our moku, our islands, all of our islands collectively, right? And this is that place to really build. And once again, through these two ways of going through those guiding questions, and this gives you the critical lens to kind of determine what is, if you need to reach out, if you need resources, you need things, that everything is kind of looked at through this place-based lens of us as an organization, us as our students, our families, our communities. Right. And this is also available in that folder that Jen will share with you. So then moving quickly, because we don't have a ton of time, people always kind of like, well, what can we do right now? What are some practices that hit all of what our youth, what our children need? So I want to just quickly introduce like 3 or 4 impacts practices. And Jen, let me know about time, because I don't see my clock on here with me, and I'm not in front of my I'm not in front of my trusty clock at the moment. And then we're hoping to have time to share some of your high impact practices as well. So one that I want to kind of focus in on is that I think that we really need to promote our Hilo skills in really understanding what's happening with the students that we're working with. So the first thing that I suggest is that we open our ears, that we open our eyes, both, yeah, and our ears, and create opportunities for children and youth to share. One thing I have heard from adolescents is some of them are sick of us. They don't want to hear any more about COVID. I don't want to talk about COVID. I don't want to talk about COVID, right? And I can kind of get it because they want to talk about other things. But we do also need to talk. Sometimes it's because it's uncomfortable. So it's that kind of combination of those things. So I have a few ideas of ways that we can do that for kids. One is what I refer to as the sideways discussion, is introducing something that's important that you want them to think about, and start with, no, I heard a story about, I read in the paper, da da da. I heard about a child. I'm sharing a book, about. I heard a story about a kid who was being bullied online, right? And then that starts a conversation with everyone because they can move it out to someone else instead of just being themselves. And then often what will happen is that then that will turn into a conversation about themselves, right? So taking something that you think is really important to talk about, right? And then using that as a way to enter a conversation. A second is what I call child initiated circle time, and I do these in all my classes as well. And there's a slideshow that's in the folder that Jen will share with you. And what I have everyone do is to create a Google slide where they write a question about what they want us to talk about, anything they want to know about everyone else. And I call it the getting to know you. I do it at the beginning of the year. Each slide will have a number on it. So then each time we go into our circle time or discussion time, then I ask someone to randomly choose a number, and then that's what we talk about. So some of the things that these are actual ones that students have written. If you were a fruit, which would you be and why? Right, that gets that playfulness, but we get to know each other. We build up Lena, we get that connection with each other. How's your life changed during COVID? What would you do if you saw bullying on social media? What's your biggest fear? So these are just some of these kind of questions that students have come up with. You never know what they're going to come up with. But it's a way for them to have their own initiated conversations. It's done by number, so it has a little bit of anonymity to it as well, to help them kind of feel safe. They can draw their slides, they can make them really pretty, they can kind of play with that. Another one is something you'll hear from me every single time I give a talk. This is like my go-to, and this is the importance of what I call generationally tiered mentorship, or creating important one-to-one relationships for children and youth of people from every single age group, right? We have different things that we might want to know. We might not like someone who's 14 might not want to talk to me about someone that, like, a love interest that they might have or a concern that they have, but they might want to talk to a 15-year-old, right? Or in other situations, they might want to talk to a kapuna. There's all these different kinds of spaces. So thinking about a child's about every one of these different ages and having one-to-one relationships with people at every single level. So when you think about our programs, I did a big study many years ago on after-school programs, and what really came out of that was this importance of this tiered mentoring, having people who looked like them, who were like them, of different ages, so that they could go to for different specific needs that they may have. Right. Another one, doing an experiment. You're gonna just spend the next 2 days without accessing your social media and see what happens. They can do an experiment. Or for kids, it might need to just be a half day, a few hours, right? We know that social media has been used as a major way for kids to connect, but it's also the leading cause of isolation, right? Because they're left to their own to try to make sense and their own social mirror of how they think they're being portrayed on social media. Seeing how what everyone else looks like they're having so much fun and they're doing all these cool things, that FOMO that I talked about earlier. So that's another thing that would be fun to do with kids, to get them really starting to think about that. And also do other things, figure out what else they do with their time and how did that feel. Having time, structuring some time where you're not at the center, making sure that they have time to be with each other. I call it just kind of time without an adult. If you're working virtually, this could be having a break room in the breakout room, where maybe they could just have, if they need just to get away and have a little bit of time to themselves, they can. When you think about your breaks and all that you want to do, maybe plan them for a bit longer, right? Setting up spaces, especially with younger children, for free play that take into account the safety needs, but gives them choice of what they might want to do. We know it's really, really important that that children and youth have the opportunity to hang with each other. This is where they practice all those skills, all those social skills that they're raising, that where they work out conflicts with each other, where they get a chance to connect without us. But the rule is that as adults, we stay out. And then this becomes a really important Hilo space. We can see how children are interacting with each other. We can see signs of anxiety or worry. We can get a sense of what might be next that we might want to do with them, from drawing it, from seeing and hearing what they're doing when we're not the centers, when we're not controlling their time and space. And then finally, in those moments, we all know the importance of breath. I feel like I need to take a breath right now. Just taking that deep breath, having those moments, maybe starting everyone off with that, maybe ending with that as they transition back to homes or to their next after school event or what it is that they're doing. Yeah. So these are just a few of some of these super high impact kinds of interventions that can really make a difference in supporting that social-emotional well-being. And if you look at them, they're not huge, they're small, but they have huge impact. So with the time that we have left, Jen, I don't think we have time to go into breakout rooms. So I was hoping if you'd be willing, either through the chat or just through unmuting yourself, what are some of the high impact ideas or practices that your programs are doing that you feel would be useful for all of us to know to uplift that socio-emotional well-being? You can put it in the chat, you can just talk out, that you'd be willing to share.
What was the question again?
Yeah, so in thinking for your own programs, for your own selves, what are some of the high impact practices that you've been implementing to support the social emotional well-being of the youth and children that you're serving? We have one Aloha Circle, yeah. And you can just share, you could just talk, or you can put in the chat. Anyone willing to share? I'm sure everyone has way better ideas than some of the ones that I do.
Well, I just wanted to just share really briefly, being a PCNC, that my main role is to support, and that's support in all areas. So it's not just student support, or it's community, family.
Yeah. So
staff.
share one of your favorite high impact practices with those who you're serving.
Nothing beats high impact than conversation, dialogue,
Yeah.
one-to-one.
Yeah.
That works
So
for
that
me.
one-to-one talking story. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Anyone else? Food, absolutely. And that food really is also that space that creates that unstructured kind of social time that's needed as well, where people can just really talk story or they can just interact. Yeah, the importance of breath. Breath helps with everything physically, centering. It's foundational. We carry this in our bodies. Any others? Games and laughter, yep. Singing, yes. Thank you. So one of the things that I know, Jen, you have that database of all the different programs, but one thing that I suggest is starting kind of to share a repository of all the great things and the high impact practices that you're doing. Because like I said, these are our gifts, yeah? We have the check-ins for the child with families as well. Maybe scheduling some kinds of check-ins, even with the schools that where a lot of your youth and students come from. To kind of see, I know after school programs really have that unique space of having that one strong leg in the community, and then also having that link to our schools. Great. So these are just a few of these, and I'll kind of leave it there. And now I have some time for any kind of questions, comments, whatever you would like to share. You could put them into the chat, any questions that you have, and we'll leave our last few minutes as open time, and I'll answer whatever I can. And not just me, but everyone in the group probably. Yeah. Questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead, Kavana.
Just a comment. I really appreciate all of your examples, and it's nice to be reminded sometimes, especially breath. I think I think sometimes we forget, we get caught up in the hustle and we forget to breathe and get grounded again. So mahalo nui. I appreciate it.
Yeah, mahalo to you. Sometimes I wonder if we should just have signs, like have a sticky on our computers or wherever we are that just says breath, just says breathe.
Yeah.
We'll look at it and then we'll just breathe. Yeah, or having all the kids do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And yes, we'll have have access to the recording. She'll provide that. Other questions or comments or sharings? I know I actually went through a lot really quickly, so I think the recording can be helpful when you only have a little bit of time. It's like, what can we present?
I thought it was going till 12:30, so when I saw how late I was like, oh good, I still have almost an hour left. Yeah, I'm just in a situation at work where I had to, tell the kid to breathe, and a lot of the times just telling them to breathe isn't enough. It's telling them how to breathe and why to breathe.
Yeah.
Because they don't
sometimes. And breathing with them. Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes they're thinking, I don't know, why are you telling me to breathe? I breathe all the time, but it's the science behind it. I don't know how many of you guys are elementary school kids versus high school or middle school, but for middle school kids, they really tend to appreciate the why. Why are you doing it? Well, and this is why. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you can have them kind of test, you can have them do their heartbeat before and then after, and they can literally start to see, or that you can have them kind of focus, like have them do shrugs on the shoulders and then breathe, and then they'll realize that they've been like this.
Yeah. Or is anybody, if you're working with elementary school kids, if you get a little pinwheel, hold on. I'm trying to eat while I'm talking to you because it's my working lunch. But so I have a little pinwheel, and so I have them do an exercise where they can either breathe with no tension, and then if they tense up, how much harder it is to make the pinwheel go. Anyway, yeah.
That's great. That's a great one. Thank you. And it has props too, which is awesome. Yeah, brain gym is great as well. Tapping. Yeah, so we have a lot of those. So those are all really great, like self-regulating strategies, right? So that really kind of helps in the moment. So we can think about things as having like that immediate in the moment where you need to self-regulate. But then there's that kind of long-term anxiety that some of those practices I presented today kind of give them the opportunity to feel, to have, get those kind of long-term feelings of competence and confidence and belonging and connection, because when we calm ourselves in the moment, then we need to also deal with the sources of the anxiety. And there's things we have control over and there's things that we don't. So those really important self-regulation practices. There are those kind of longer term, kind of helping them shift their thinking sort of practices. And then those like agentive practices that we aren't completely disempowered in our lives. We don't have a complete lack of control. We have a lot that we can do, and we have so much abundance around us that we can tap into and that we are important parts of, you know. Look at learning. That's interesting. Right? Kids love challenging their peers. That's absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. Any other questions or comments before we shut it down for the day? I hope it was useful. Okay, then Jen, I'll turn it back over to you, and mahalo. Mahalo nui, good luck this year to all of us. If you need me in any kind of way, I'm at UH Hilo. I'll just throw up while Jen's finishing up my email. Feel free to reach out. I run the Center for Place-Based Social Emotional Development, and our job is to literally be all the supports that we can to all of you. Mahalo.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. And I invite everyone else to join in a virtual round of applause or to put your appreciations in the chat for Marjorie, and just thank you for sharing your mana'o and just all these great ideas and allowing a space for conversation. I put in the chat a link to a short evaluation. We'd love to get your feedback and hear from you guys what else you'd like to see in future webinars. So yeah, thank you for joining. And Paula, any last words?
No, just repeating what you say. Thank you so much. It's very nice to see you all. And yeah, I hope you have a nice holiday tomorrow if it's a holiday for you. And we'll see you next time during our webinars. Thank you for joining us.